Just yesterday, legendary pro main tank Fissure retired from the Overwatch League. That's some serious bad news. The good news, however, no longer contractually tied to the Overwatch League in any way, he felt that it was a good time to leak that role lock is coming for Stage 4 of the Overwatch League. What is this, like the third or fourth major leak that's come through on this? You guys know what I think. The culmination of information has made it seem like I was correct in that they were working on role lock, but it got delayed, and all the behavior points to the announcement not only for Stage 4, but also probably into the game, along with all the other stuff that Jeff has said should come with the 222, as he's discussed, role queue, role-specific SR, incentives for queuing into roles, all those other good things that we're really excited about. This is a huge step forward for the game, and I'm ecstatic to say this is exactly what I want. I think it's going to be a really big deal, and everyone's going to want to be trying out this new system. However, there is a gargantuan pink elephant in the room that up until this point, Blizzard has been balancing in an unrestricted pick format, with no role restrictions at all. Then all of a sudden, putting these restrictions into place, you would think that they would want to put in a massive patch as to usher in that gameplay to be in a much more healthy and fun state. If role lock is indeed coming, we all should be discussing the types of nerfs and buffs that are going to improve it now before it just drops tomorrow, and then all of a sudden we realize there's tons of power creep in the game that makes the gameplay worse. We don't want that. So to help solve and discuss this, I've invited Samito back onto the channel again to talk about this. He's a great guy to talk to, not only because we're friends, but he also is a player who's gone from being a ranked streamer to now he plays for Triumph, who's in NA Contenders, one of the toughest contenders regions there is. So he's got experience not only with the ranked environment and the chaos that is, but in the extreme hardcore full team environment as well. And also, we teamed up to talk about the previous big patch that came in, which always, there's going to be a high percentage of luck when it comes into predicting metas and actually knowing the effect the patch is going to have. It's impossible to always be right about that, but the things that we were talking about many months ago seem pretty clairvoyant to what they ended up being. A whole lot of skepticism of the things we were saying about GOATs benefiting from the CC buffs in pro play, which it did, or characters like Orisa and Ball getting super powered for the ranked meta, well, that happened as well. So now that we're here, let's try to steer the ship in a more positive direction and try to distribute the power level across the different roles, because everything is kind of wonky and supercharged. Ah, that's an Orisa pun, get it? And we'd like to rein things back a little bit to have a bit more of a reasonable distribution of playstyles right now. You'll hear from the conversation, this subject is almost too big for us to really take a solid grip on. The whole game is super powered, so we have to tread lightly in which direction we want to go, and ultimately, we may just have to concede that the power level of hero abilities and cooldowns is not something we're likely to see change, but with any luck, we could get a bit more of a diverse meta rather than just seeing bunker mirrors all the time. You'll want to check out Samito's links in the description to his YouTube page where he streams, as well as his Twitter. And without further ado, let's jump into the conversation, kicking it off with Samito's opinions on the heroes that pose the biggest problems coming right into a locked role 222.
Sombra can effectively silence an entire kit for 18 seconds. That's not good in interactive. Orisa is broken. She has a permanent shield as well as one of the best force movement abilities in the game, which we've talked about. The idea or the feeling of rock, paper, scissors with comps, right? Where back in the day, I know we've talked about this, that you could play almost anything into almost anything. At the end of the day, the individual player's ability would dictate whether or not you won or lost the fight. But how the game is balanced currently, if they pick a certain hero, you, like, effectively, especially Orisa as a main tank, you cannot play half the DPS heroes in the game to that effectively. You can't. Like, you are forced into swapping if you want to really stand a chance, and that stuff just has to go. So, we need Orisa nerfs, we need Sombra nerfs. Don't get me started. I'm sure we'll get into the conversation later, but those two are the two biggest things for me, just in individual characters.
Now, from your standpoint, is this a ranked discussion or a pro meta discussion? Because the thing that I keep highlighting to people is that the big problem we have right now, I feel, is that a lot of balance changes came through to try to put a dent into the GOATs meta, but now they're putting in an arbitrary restriction over the top of that, which erases it anyway, and those nerfs and buffs and everything they did barely had an effect anyway. So we're sort of, this power creep, I say it over and over again, right? But that's happened.
It's real.
So,
it's real.
What do you think it affects more in those two camps? And what specifically do we need to go down from here to make it make sense for both? Because that's what Blizzard wants to do.
Well, for both, if this comes out, you'll see a lot of because I want you to remember this in season 11 before the support ult buffs came around, right? Where that really solidified goats for a year, where you saw sound barrier buffs, nano buffs, moira buffs. Do you remember those?
A sleeper one in that one is Zarya's charge rate retention. That's a big one as well, and sound barrier, those two. Because a lot of people think goats was just Brig, but there was a patch. Brig came out and triple support was pretty good, but goats didn't really become unbeatable until Zarya and Lucio got buffed as well, and Mercy got nerfed at the same time.
And then dragon combo. Yeah, well, it was even with Mercy nerfs, dragon combo used to kill through barrier, but ever since they changed that, and you saw the goats mirrors with Zen instead, because obviously Zen goats being better than Moira goats. Like no DPS combo would beat the goats comp, which was supposed to be its weak point. But yeah, no, pro play especially, like you'll see just bunker 24/7. We talked about this. McCree has Storm Arrow on his primary fire. So it's just, oh God, there's so many changes that do need to come. It definitely is for both though. It's not one especially, but ranked will be, just as Orisa hoggy as, pro play will.
I was kind of thinking about this. Is there a chance, though, that pros are good enough at dive that they'll be able to dive bunker comps, or is that kind of off the table, do you think?
I think it's kind of off the table because they just go clockwork comp, and you can't really play Sombra Genji to that because Torb and Mei both absolutely lambast Genji. So it's probably better to just mirror the snipers and try to take that. It will be map dependent, though, but on maps, like Rialto, where, before that support ult patch came in and after, the Grab Dragon meta, if you were playing Rein Zarya into Orisa Hog, like there wasn't a lot you could do, or Orisa Diva, right? Like Orisa as a main tank is individually the strongest one by far, because, I would say second to that is Ball, because, Winston can get destroyed by Sombra, and all this other stuff in the game. Rein especially, but Orisa, she's got her Fortify and a permanent shield in front of her. Like she's individually just one of the strongest tanks in the game, the individually strongest tank in the game.
Are we coming to a conclusion here that we need like the whole game nerfed or something?
Yes.
Because is that really where we're at? Because okay, I guess where do we want the game to go? Like what do we ideally even want to see? Because obviously I think we're both in agreement right now. Like the 2-2-2 bunker comp is going to be king and queen, maybe, with Orisa at the top of it. Like what are we trying to get to compete with that in a more healthy way? Like what do we want to see ideally, and what buffs and nerfs are required to get us there?
I want to see counterplay in this game again. I want to see mechanical skill and abilities that focus on you outplaying your opponent rather than them forcibly shutting you down, like Sombra hack, Orisa pull, Mei freeze. All this stuff in the game that's designed to shut people down has just been continuously buffed. I think I tweeted this out the other day. I think it's been roughly 90% or 80 to 90% of characters in Overwatch have been buffed since release. One of the only ones not being buffed being Genji and Tracer, obviously, and we all know how they're doing, right? I would be happy to see, I think, Orisa shield nerfs 100%. Maybe have her kit be more fortified based so that she can still maintain the space, but her team and the snipers and all this other stuff can't play the shield as well. Global force movement ability nerfs and Sombra nerfs, please, for the love of God. It's just a kit. Sombra cannot be that forgiving. It cannot be that easy to continuously shut people down. And I know it might not be the same at lower level plays, but if you look at the highest level of play, Sombra, and especially Sombra Goat's becoming much more popular ever since, Houston and Dante started smacking everybody with it, right? It's just, an effective silence time of 18 seconds. If you hack somebody, EMP them, and then hack them again, like some form of rework to the way that Sombra hack works. I think Zarya Bubble should be able to cleanse hack, and global nerfs to a lot of the characters in the game. Like McCree needs to get reverted. I have said Storm Arrow needs to get nerfed, as known to be one of the better Hanzos on ladder. Like I've said, and Raxu said this as well, Storm Arrow never needed 6 arrows. It never needed. Personally, I don't like Storm Arrow. That should get tuned down a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what else. I couldn't name it off the top of my head, but I would love to see Blizzard take a look at how they can step back towards the roots of the game, where back in the day there was a lot of counterplay, there wasn't ability spam, all this force movement with doom punch, hack, wrecking ball slam. All this stuff just needs to be tuned back, and maybe an ultimate nerf as well. PvP was talking about that on Twitter, and I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah, it's something I've asked for, feels like, for like a year now. Would have been nice, I think, slowing that down a bit. There's downsides to all of these things, and why it gets a bit difficult to get into the specifics with this, because like a character like Ball, it's just like go take some, maybe problem areas and highlight why they are the way they are. If you were Blizzard and you wanted Goats to have a strong counter, like Ryan Goats especially, getting Ball to upgrading Ball's ability to go in, easily get shields, and just get more and more effective over time made sense, because that's the only real way he was ever going to compete with the power creep of what Goats created. However, the problem is now we're removing that from even being an option, and we're left with like Super Ball and Super Orisa, who aren't really competitively viable necessarily, like, fringe viability at the highest level of play, and now they're just sort of unleashed onto the game. So what we'll get is Orisa and Ball being the best two tanks de facto. I am a little bit curious though, because there is a bit of a phenomenon right now that I've been experiencing on ladder, and it's that a lot of times, like, 3 DPS just feels way better than a lot of other options. Like, you can go Orisa Hog, sure, but if you're not landing the whole hook combo, you might as well just have a third DPS. And this goes for a few reasons. Like, D.Va's a lot harder to play. I know, like, Emong made a very good video saying how he's going to still stick with the character and feels she can be really strong. If you're as good as Emong, yeah, I think you probably can.
Yeah.
For most of us, like, it feels like I'm just reaching out into the void, trying to grab at a teammate as they get hooked away and die anyway. Like, I always feel out of reach of being able to make a player an impact, so much so that I might as well just be playing damage. Now, when we go into 2-2-2, that won't be the case. So perhaps, is that going to be a good thing for, kind of limiting how many things you can have? Because if you have a comp where, you have to play 2 tanks, well, there's a certain amount of ability spam that automatically gets reduced, right? Like, maybe then D.Va looks more playable because you have to play a tank. Or is it just going to be Orisa Hog mirrors all day without any changes? Do we need to revert the D.Va changes, for example? Is that something you'd consider?
D.Va does not need to be reverted. I think that this patch was good for her. It's just that everything else has just been buffed to the point where, these things just look better. And that's just how Blizzard deals with problems in their meta. Like, they could never really successfully kill dive. They put Brig in the game to do that. And then, to kill Goats, again, it's more avoiding, actually balancing and nerfing the characters that need to be nerfed. And they're just going to hopefully go nuclear with 2-2-2. I think, again, I do think 2-2-2 is going to be good. But I think 2-2-2 will definitely keep D.Va viable. I think her kit is fine where it is. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, like the Orisa Hog combo, especially, with a comp like Clockwork that we've seen in EU contenders and sometimes around like that with the Orisa Hog May Torb, like abilities that focus on just shutting you down and denying you from doing anything. It honestly will be better to just play the bunker in the mirror. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of diversity. I think we're going to see pretty much perma Orisa, especially since he's so easy to get value from. Like with Reinhardt, you have to be aware of your positioning. With Monkey, you have to be aware of your positioning. You have to dive in synergy with cooldowns. But Orisa, it's just like, press E, walk up, left shift. It's just so forgiving. And for players, it's just going to be so much easier to get value from that than anything else.
I think we both would be in agreement that what we would want to see is perhaps then the game tuned down to where like D.Va is now and have things simplified and brought back. The only thing is, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's what we're going to get what we want, because a lot of players, I think, would be really mad if all of a sudden all sorts of things were just way weaker. And to say weaker, maybe the better way to explain it is a lot harder to do, right? Like you talked about Hanzo, 6 storm arrows. If you're, in plat or gold and you're used to be able to spam those babies out and eventually hit the McCree in the head, if all of a sudden you have 3, well, that's like a feels bad, right? Like it's not as engaging or empowering to the mass player base. So I really doubt they're going to go that way. Competitively speaking, I think that would be the best thing to do. But what's more likely, I think, is for them to buff things into competition with things like Orisa Hog. So, for example, I think I completely agree, right? And even I had Coach DPay on the channel like a month ago or something, and he thinks in a 2-2-2, Ryan Zarya would basically be unplayable for those reasons, because you don't have all the bells and whistles of the full 3-3 to keep it alive. And how do we rectify that? Because Ryan Zarya is a really fun comp to play, actually, because the synergy between Ryan and Zarya are fun. Ryan is one of the most popular characters in the game. What buffs could come in, assuming we have to buff our way through this and keep down the road of power creep? I apologize, Samito, but what buffs could Ryan get? Like, I think passive, where he has some CC immunity, or like soft immunity, like let's say boops are halved on Reinhardt. Because I always thought it was weird that Lucio could launch him across the map, for example. What do you think about that?
I don't even want to think about it, to be honest with you. But I know, knowing Blizzard, they don't they don't like to think about the healthiest way for the game, so they're just gonna keep buffing everything if whatever. But geez, I guess maybe some CC resistance. I mean, either way, you're not gonna beat that. you just can't. Like, there's nothing that you should be able to do to an Orisa Hog playing high ground properly with a lot of space in between you and them on Reinhardt. I'm thinking about first point Numbani attack, right? Like trying to play Reinhardt into that. It's just like, ugh. I think CC resistance would have to come to him. Let me make this very clear. Please don't do this, Blizzard. Please nerf the problems. Don't buff the counters. But if you had to buff the counter, I think CC resistance would be good for Reinhardt. And for Zarya, give her Bubble the ability to clear hacks, which I think you should have anyway. That would be a change that I'm okay with right now. Because think about it. Like, Bubble cleanses everything. Why does it not cleanse hack? Right? Like, I feel like for consistency's sake of the game, that would be a good idea. But yeah, the only thing I would even consider doing would be CC resistance for Ryan.
Yeah, it'll be interesting where they go. I mean, another character that is on the top of everyone's minds, I think, is Brigitta as well. And again, I don't think we're going to nerf the game down to Brig. Like, how are we going to... We've talked about her before quite often, being sort of the centerpiece of the 3-3 meta. Like, what should they do with Brig to make her healthy, you think? Just straight up healing buffs so that she competes with, like, maybe Lucio-ish healing? Or
Oh, you don't have to change anything for her. She's fine where she is.
Do you think she'll get played in 2-2-2?
I think she'll get played in low ranks in 2-2-2, yeah. I don't think she'll be played at high ranks. But that's how it should be. Reaper doesn't get played at high ranks either. Brig should be a character like Reaper, where they're easy to play, but once you get to that highest level of play, their kit simply can't offer the same amount of utility as characters that are harder to play can. Right? That's why you don't see Reaper at high level play. And you shouldn't see Reaper at high level play consistently anyway. I think the fact that she's got a 500 HP shield and 250 base, she survives Hanzo headshot at base health. Like, she should be a pick that's designed to ward off lower level Genjis who aren't as good at the game, who can't get value, who have bad positioning. She's so easy to play right now in ranked, at least in low levels. Like trust me, guys, just try to exist on her and you'll get so much value. Again, she shines and is an S+ tier hero in the highest level of play, but in lower levels, she'll still be fun. You don't have to change anything with her.
I will say this as well. A lot of people say, well, Brig's just terrible in 2-2-2. I think if you play her well, you'd be shocked how much that isn't true. Like, I think people who say that just don't play her very well and stand around. They don't activate Inspire from range, and they don't get value out of Rally. Like, Rally's still insane. Rally was bugged. Yeah. It was bugged before, and I still came up with a Brig rallying, and it took like an entire clip to even put a dent in her health pool. I'm like, wasn't this fixed? Like, isn't she supposed to be able to die now? And no, she's still basically invincible with Rally. Rally's still an insane ult and as good as a DPS ult. So I think I tend to agree with you. I'm fine with her being at Reaper levels of power, and I'm just not going to argue really that point because that's true. So is there any other outlier characters that we think are in problem zones?
Sombra.
Okay, we talked about her. Does she stand out of the pack as... So, like, a bunch of the damage characters, you think then damage just needs to get nerfed overall? Because...
Yes.
Because really, they buffed it up to try to be able to kill goats. Like, all the damage characters over time got buffed. It's like, can pros please play damage? We'll just keep forcing it out. And now we're at a place where damage and ladder, I think, is like way better than anything else. So we're in a really weird spot because right now, I feel damage is maybe across the board, like as a role, is the most powerful I can remember it being in ranked for, like, I don't know. Back in the day, I guess Tracer carried every game, so maybe to that. But now it's like every character feels like they have potential Tracer level carries available to them in the damage role. So global nerfs to damage would be nice, I think. Why do we think that damage being too strong now would be a bad thing in role lock? Doesn't everybody want to play damage and wreck things in front of them? Isn't that a good thing?
It's not about playing damage, right? It's about actually allowing this game to have healthy interactions between two players and allowing their skill to shine. If you buff everything so much, right? Think about the GOATS meta, first off. You know how the fights against the best teams, for example, when you saw Shock versus Vancouver on, I remember this distinctly on Busan in the Stage 2 finals, how long that first fight went on for. It went on to, each team cycled half of their ult pools before anybody capped the first point because nobody was making any mistakes, right? If all of these abilities are so strong, it's really hard for better players that have more discipline and mechanical skill to actually shine. Because if the abilities are so good, it easily shuts them down. Does that make sense? Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, skill can't shine. as easily. The game is so much more forgiving if the abilities carry the mechanical skill and the abilities carry the player. And if you look back at the old days where everything was much slower, you rarely saw these DPS, unless they were a pro player, right? Like some of the best players in the world. You didn't see these players just demolish everything with ease because of how slow the abilities were. Like it took a lot more to be good at the game than it does now. And if all of these abilities are so effective, it requires less of the player to get more value out of them. It needs to be harder to get value out of the game because that way players feel more rewarded when they do it. It shouldn't be easy to get good. And that's the hard thing for people to accept is that you should not be handed skill on a silver platter, right? That's why when you get it, it's so rewarding and it feels so good. That's the very nature of why people grind video games and grind to get good. They want to get this very hard to obtain skill. But with everything, and I would say this is true for all roles, the way that everything has been buffed, Blizzard has drastically reduced the skill ceiling required to get this max value. And that's why I personally want nerfs. I want players to have to be able to shine mechanically, positionally, cooldown management wise, but if the abilities are also good, it's way too easy to get max value out of them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I struggle to narrow in what that would even look like in Overwatch in 2019 and onward, because the game is just so complex now, right? Like, to some degree, like, I seem kind of accusatory with the power creep situation that Blizzard's got themselves into, but it naturally happens with new additions to the game anyway. Like, if any new addition you bring in, unless it's irrelevant, it's going to power creep the game to some degree. It just has to happen. That's just the way games work. But I mean, I think they didn't do themselves any favors by doubling down on that, right? But like, no matter what, that's going to happen to some degree, right? So I think it might just be over the era that you're kind of thinking back to. Like Tracer Genji dive to me, I think was just pure mid-fight mechanics, right? Like, sure, there was strong ults and stuff too, but it mostly was like positioning, I'm here, you're there, and it wasn't as brain dead as I think people assume it was. Really a lot more disciplined than people gave it credit for. It wasn't just relentlessly diving. I mean, NA played it that way, where they relentlessly dove each other nonstop. But in Korea, it was way more slow down and punish heavy. But now the thing we do want, I think a lot of players, is the diversity of strategy, where a character like Brig kind of comes in where, okay, you want to dive, well, I have, Baptiste Immortality Field or Brig or whatever entity. Torb now is actually viable. Bro, did you actually think we were going to talk about how sick Torb was a year or two ago? No way did you think that, right? And to some degree, this is kind of a success from Blizzard in one way where...
No, I agree. Those are great.
Like, where these characters are fun and accessible to people, where Hanzo was just too hard for me at release, dude. I'm just gonna be honest. I feel like if your name wasn't Raksu, you weren't gonna ever hit anything. You just wouldn't hit them, and you might as well play Soldier. Like, it just wasn't possible unless you were good. And some of that is, I feel good about. Like, I kind of want that, but at the same time, the mass player base, I think, has way more fun when all of the characters are accessible as well. But that does have the downside, like you said. There's no way that we can have our cake and eat it too with that, right? Either characters are pushed into viability and are given this cooldown power, this strategical power that requires less skill, or it's extreme top-down balance where, like, Widow and Tracer run the whole world. And it seems like the community didn't want that, but also maybe they don't want the thing that they're going to be getting, which is a very cooldown based game no matter what, even with Goats away. Like, Goats is like pure cooldowns and slow meta, right? Where we're still in that era, we'll just not have those same characters, but instead we'll have, Torb, Mei, and Hog Hook and all that other kind of stuff, right? Like, that's where Overwatch is now.
I think Torb is great. I agree with you, but I also think that there's a right and wrong way to do it. If you look at characters that were not viable 2 years ago, that were reworked into a perfect direction. Junkrat, where he is right now, I think he's perfect. His kit is way more in the hands of the players and the mechanical skill. I think that's phenomenal. He's not necessarily OP, but if you play him properly, you can get a lot of value from him. Torb being the same. I think the Torb rework was needed, and it was great. I think he's in a perfect spot right now where, he's good in these situations. And in fact, he can carry in a lot of these situations, but he's not too broken. Sombra, on the other hand, heroes like Sombra, where, Hack is so forgiving. EMP it's an absolute counter, right? There's no way to beat it if you get hit by it. And to me, that's just silly. Like, if you look at Dragon Blade, for example, like, You know, a Genji's blading, it's high risk, high reward. That interaction could go either way, right? But if you get hit with a 4-man EMP, that interaction's going one way and one way only most of the time. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That's the kind of stuff that I want out of the game. But I don't know. I think there's a fine line. And as I say, the truth often lies somewhere in the middle. And I think, you know, obviously, the game should not go as far as it did back in the day that I just mentioned. It shouldn't be that extreme where obviously Tracer Genji can just carry everything. And, you know, I don't really care what hero specifically it is. I just want healthy interaction and counterplay where player ability can shine. And maybe I'm just saying this because all I've been playing and ranked is against Orisa Hog, where you literally can't do anything to it. Like, you just, like, as Hanzo, like, my eliminations per 10 minutes are higher than they've ever been, but my win rate is the lowest it's been in 6 or 7 seasons. That's the Hanzo rework. Like, you can't have enough impact on the game because Orisa simply has a shield up. And there's nothing special that Orisa is doing to outplay our team, right? It's just like, she locked that hero, she exists, therefore she is winning. Those are the kind of interactions that I want to go away. But I do agree with what you're saying, and I do agree with a lot of the community where a lot of these heroes should be more interactive and fun. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Torb, Junkrat are the prime examples of how to do it correctly.
Okay, all right. So I think to nail us down to some goals that we hope Blizzard looks at, I think obviously it would be nice if Orisa gets nerfed and then all of a sudden we see like a tank circle of life with the different types of tank comps, because you know, I've seen you, we've talked about this on Twitter, obviously. The interactions between dive tanks and Ryan Zarya, those are fun and healthy interactions, and Orisa is kind of cheesy. I can't lie. Like, it's one of my best heroes, and I think it's okay for her to enable. I feel like you should feel like it's hard to run her on attack, frankly, because she should really only work on defense. I think that's fair to say. And maybe that's not fair because we reworked characters like Torb into being able to be run on attack even. But I think she shouldn't rob Reinhardt of his job. I think that's more so where I'm coming from, where now it feels like the pushing tank, which should enjoy that,
is garbage.
Isn't able to be played. Yeah, it's just not very good. I mean, like, you could still get it to work sometimes, but it's just really hard. It's not worth it. It's not worth the risk, because there's so many. Well, here's what happens with Ryan, right? Like, if you actually can commit past the shield, I feel like Ryan could still carry from that spot. It's just so often is he just CC'd away to the other side of the shield in the danger zone, loses his shield, and then he's just, just standing out in the open, gets shot. Then he just dies.
The thing is, like, okay, he finally makes it past the shield where he should be strong. Well, guess what? Orisa's got another one, and force movement, and fortify, and you know, all this other stuff that our teammates are playing. Like, you just, why make your job extra hard when you can just mirror and you know, win the mirror fight 40% of the time instead of losing the Rhine fight 80% of the time? You know, like, it's I don't know. Make your job easier, players out there. Play easy characters in low ranks. You'll climb, I promise.